It is a pleasure, Glenn, always to be with you. I apologize, I was a little late today. Too much watching World Cup.
Yeah, it's no, I've been watching it myself. It's yeah.
So, sorry about Norway.
Well, I today I wanted to ask you about the concerns in the U.S. and I guess among its allies. That is, it tends to be that China seeks to replace the position of the U.S. as the hegemon. However, it doesn't seem like we're going from one hegemon to another global hegemon. Rather, the world is shifting from a unipolar system that is with one center of power, previously the U.S., to a multipolar system with many centers of power. Now, from what I understand, you're arguing now that in the financial world, how to interpret China's actions is not that it's seeking to take over the role held by the United States, that is this very hegemonic financial role, but rather to create alternatives to have, manage this several center of financial powers. I was wondering if you could unpack what the Chinese are doing, especially in terms of their goal now of seeking to internationalize the yuan.
Okay, so let's put this in context. When we start talking about it, hegemony, yes, there's the financial side, and I'll get to that in a second. Politically, China is, they invested $1.4 billion in the Belt and Road Initiative. They've talked about coloring in. They've talked about having security, development, sovereignty, and a means of settling matters without going to tanks. So China on all fronts is very different from the United States. But Washington cannot leave the idea that other countries would act the exact same way that Washington does. And this is part of the problem. It's very difficult to deal with Washington because they always assume they understand exactly what you're going to do. And what is that? Exactly what they have done or intend to do in the same circumstances. So they're trying to wrap their head around this idea that there could be a powerful nation that does not want to take over the world, does not see it as economically or politically or militarily feasible. So that's where we are. So when we start talking about the financial side, please remember that the political and military side is there as well. So financially, what is China doing? They have said that they want to do more trade. Obviously, their investments in the Belt and Road Initiative are part of that, and it has been very successful. You look at countries in the Belt and Road Initiative, and they are, in fact, above the world median in terms of growth. You look at the developed nations in terms of actual growth, percentage growth, they're below the median. So for those countries, it makes a lot of sense, and so does the political and the military side. Stressing defensive, keeping regimes intact, no meddling in the affairs of other countries. This resonates very much with the global South. Now, financially, China has no interest in replicating the U.S. model. Why? Well, looking at a country that is divided economically, where the economic disparities are huge, where it has this massive debt that was accumulated. Why? Because having the U.S. dollar as the hegemonic currency made it cheap in terms of borrowing. It also had the unwanted effect of making American goods more expensive and therefore less competitive internationally. This hollowed out the U.S. economy, and it creates a lot of hot money flows that are coming in and out of the United States. So from China's perspective, having a hegemonic currency is not good, not desirable at all. Or the issue is, how do you do trade? So China has put together a system which, like the U.S., encourages trade, and they've now extended it so that it's easier to do trade. They've increased the volume of trade that can be done by allowing more bonds to be sold. You sell more bonds, there's more liquidity in the market. They've also created systems and products that allow you to borrow on short-term basis against the bonds that you are holding. Why are you holding the bonds? Because you are trading with China. So that means you don't have to sell your bonds. It makes it a lot easier to figure out what your, how to manage your trade responsibilities in terms of somebody wants to get paid in renminbi, you have to give them renminbi. How do you do that? Well, this is the system that allows you to do that. So China has created these, increased the liquidity. It obviously has created more opportunities and tools to do so, but it has not opened up its internal account, what they call the capital account. That means that the yuan is not freely convertible from inside China to outside. So if you have yuan outside, obviously you can go to a bank and they will give, exchange the currency. But if you're inside with China, there are strict capital controls. They do not want money flowing around freely. And there are concerns about dirty money being pushed out of China because the people that here in China cannot explain where that money came from. The country has no interest in helping them evade their taxes and responsibilities. So there are still very much controls on that. Now, where is this all going? A lot of people ask. Well, eventually, China is going to have a digital currency, and I mean literally. So I haven't used cash in many, many years. The only times I've done it is when I go to birthday parties or to weddings, and I just slip crisp 100 yuan notes into a red packet and therefore give them out. So where is this all heading towards? A lot of people ask that question, and I point out that China has been working slowly but steadily towards an electronic currency. In essence, doing away with cash. Now, this would have huge repercussions in terms of the way that people do business, because cash would not be acceptable. There would be a means of turning an electronic yuan into a US dollar or whatever. That would not change. Internally, though, within China, imagine a world where you know where everything comes from or goes to. If there is, in fact, a transaction, you as the government, and there are taxes to be paid, you can, in essence, tax at the point of the transaction. That makes it a lot easier. You don't need auditing anymore. All right. Everything is, in essence, recorded, and it's there, and you could look on your dashboard and you can make analysis and figure out what's going on, but you don't need to have an accountant. This obviously is not good news for most of the accountants. It also, in terms of tax collection, but it also tells you exactly where your economy is. You're not waiting 2, 3, 4, 6 months to figure out, what people are doing on any given moment in time. You have a big dashboard which tells you exactly how the economy is running. Reports can be put out much more quickly, and the markets can react much more quickly as well. So that will change the way that people do their investing and how they measure the markets. But it also helps in terms of internationally, because then the yuan can be convertible in certain circumstances. There will be no fear that illicit money is flowing out of the United States, at least through electronic means, and any money that's flowing back to individuals will be, obviously, they'll have to explain where it came from. And if they're putting it into electronic system, it's going to be very, very difficult. So the world is going to change. And this is not just China. Every country is going to do, in essence, the same thing. And why? For the reasons I just stated. You can run your economy better, you can collect more taxes, and you can avoid a lot of the dark money that goes unnoticed in so many economies. It could help with corruption. Obviously, it makes things a lot cheaper and a lot faster. For instance, the system that China has put out, and they announced the second part in Hong Kong yesterday, was in essence saying that we can cut the cost of transactions between 1/3 and 50%. Well, it's not a lot, but if you start adding that up on a global basis, you're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars. So these types of efficiencies, which are driving China, are unsurprisingly the same kinds of things they're doing with their manufacturing. They're trying to make things less easy, create less friction during the process, whether it's logistics, manufacturing, or finance. And this combination is continuing to help China remain competitive. It can produce goods cheaply, it can get them to you cheaply, and it makes payment, receiving payment or making payment cheaper and faster. So this is what China is trying to do. We'll have to see how it works out, but if it's successful, as I said, be prepared. It's going to be a different world.
What this implies, though, is by having this digital one, which is internationalized, what we're talking about then is also de-dollarization as a side effect, at least. That is, the US dollar will be less appealing, I guess, in international trade. But as we said before, it's not as if everyone's going to shift to the Chinese currency. But how do you see this working? Will they work side by side, or do you think that once the American dollar begins to be used less, bubble will burst? And I mean, how do you see the money markets working like this?
Okay, so a nice way of just saying, hey, Einar, what's going to happen when everything falls down?
Yeah, how's that?
Yeah. Okay, so let's put it this way. China is not, as I said earlier, trying to replace the US dollar. It doesn't want that place. It thinks it's dangerous, so obviously they're going in a different direction. Okay, so what is happening there? Well, China has about 140 out of 195 countries that are registered in the world. 140 of those, about 70%, are in fact China and that country are the number one trade partners. So obviously there's a need to cut the risk between trades between these countries. So that is what really China is doing. The US dollar is used in international transactions. It's used in a lot of financialization. This is the kind of making bets, turning the world into a giant casino, not betting on putting money into companies, but betting on what will happen in the future. So China is just simply trying to make things more efficient. So therefore, it is a competitor in the sense that it's an alternative to the US dollar, but it does not wish to supplant it. So where does the dollar's true weakness? The dollar's true weakness has nothing to do with China. It has to do with the fact that it has this massive 40 trillion and growing debt, which it has no intention or ability to repay or even a plan to repay it. And the fact that the digital systems that are coming up, and China won't be the only one. There will be others as well. Europe has their ideas. Obviously, the Middle East could do something. You could have different continents trying to create digital markets for trade. Why? It's cheaper. This is about the market. If I'm a business and it's going to take me, $100 to make a transaction versus $20, guess what? I'm going to go for the $20 solution, as long as it's secure and safe. And this is really where the dollar is very weak. The existing systems protect a lot of enfranchised players in terms of the banks, credit cards, rating agencies. They're all they want to hang on to the system as long as possible. Why? Because they collect fees from it. And those fees, power their businesses and their bonuses and things like this. And coincidentally, they have a lot of clout in Washington. But this is an international issue. And no matter what they do with the US dollar, they cannot make other countries adopt it as their trade system. And Donald Trump has made all sorts of threats. If you do anything this way, 100%, 10,000%, whatever, I'm exaggerating, tariffs, he's going to make you adhere to the American system. But we all know that doesn't work. And that's why smuggling began. Even if you make it illegal, people will find other ways, especially if it's a lot cheaper. But in this particular case, they can choose legal means to settle their trade. And China is a big part of that trade internationally, with alternatives. And China, as I said, is just going to be one of them. And so, right now, it would be nice if the US Treasury, instead of trying to protect Donald Trump, would be laying plans for its own digital currency, and then also how the US deficit can be dealt with. not only the deficit, but the huge debt pile as well. Because right now the U.S. is sailing along basically on about $2 trillion a year of yearly deficit. That means every year the U.S. borrows about $2 trillion, sometimes it's going to be a little bit more, in order just to pay its bills. So that money is piled on top of the debt pile. And as I said, you have to deal with the deficit, and you also have to deal with the debt pile while still growing the economy. And yet I hear very little about this other than we're going to make America great again, which is a slogan, not a plan.
Yeah, on that though, because you are correct, it is a slogan, but I think many people were attracted to that slogan because they recognize that the US is becoming less and less competitive vis-a-vis China. They have, of course, the domestic problems building up as well. But what is it if the Americans would translate this slogan into economic policies? What do you think they would look like? I guess you can go two paths. One would be seek to revive the American economy, but what would be required in a strategy to reverse the decline we're seeing? Because they're now $39.5 trillion in debt, and yes, it's going to pass into 40 trillions, which is quite dramatic. Servicing those debts are very difficult. How can the US turn this around, given the lack of economic competitiveness? And the second would be, what can we expect from the US in terms of how it would counter China? Not in the market, but I expect some containment policies, that is more attacks on the Chinese tech, sever maybe blockades on transportation corridors, as it did with Iranian oil going to China. Can it block any financial aspects of the Chinese economy, that is access to banks or currencies? How do you see how the Americans will essentially play this?
Okay, lots of questions there.
I went for a big question there. So
okay, you want me to answer the first question or the second question first?
I will leave that to you.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to start with the second question, and then that what is the United States doing right now? It is doing all the things you just said. It has a containment policy which it's pursuing. It believes, and this isn't me saying this. If you get on, J.D. Vance has been crying this. Talking about the red threat to communism taking over the world, things like this. It just sounds a little silly since communism is engaged in capitalism. And so how can they really be communists? And the fact is that they're outdoing the United States. So the U.S. is going to continue, despite this kind of trade. I shouldn't say it's not even a truce. It's just an arrangement. There's a recognition that the economies are intertwined, especially in very sensitive areas like defense, the rare earths. China has about 70% of all the critical elements that are doing. But the real bottleneck in terms of their production, the real bottleneck that China controls is based on technology. For many, many years, other countries did not want to mine and refine rare earths. It was a very dirty business, very expensive. And they basically abandoned it because China was developing a market. And as with most things that China does, their bet was, we will take lower margin in terms of our profits, but we will try to have a larger presence in the market. And they achieved this. And where they've achieved it is not so much just having all the rare earths. There's actually quite a bit all around the world. The issue is the refining. In order to make these gallium and all the rest of these rare earths usable, they have to be of very high purity. In order to get to that purity, you need to have processes. So it involves not only how you extract them, chemical processes, then obviously you have environmental ones. So this all is combined, represents a 10 to 15 year advance on current technology from other places in the world, and a huge advance in terms of the cost. For instance, Chinese made rare earth elements in certain categories will be 20 times less expensive than something made in Japan. So let that sink in. Even if you can make it, you are going to expend huge amounts in order to do that. So cost is a factor. But this isn't the only area. I mean, there are so many areas where China has become the largest supplier and the manufacturer of so many elements, whether you're talking about vitamin C or the elements of gunpowder and propellants and things like this, to this, intermediate goods. You need certain types of screws that are made of certain type of materials. Guess where it comes from? It comes from China. They, as I will keep repeating, the Chinese model is about going into mature areas where there's a 5% return on value on your capital. And what they do is they say, we'll take 3.5%. And so they are able to capture the market, but their plan is to capture 3.5% of a very large market, which makes it doable. So this is what China has done, and this is what the U.S. confronts now. Now the question is, what can the U.S. do? Yes, they've done the blacklisting. They have indicated, and we talked about this before in terms of the gentleman at the War Department who says that the plan is to interrupt China's energy flows. Venezuela, Nigeria, Iran, what do they have in common? They all sell oil to China. And in terms of interfering with them, and the idea is you cut off energy to China, somehow you'll starve it. Well, that hasn't quite worked out as planned. China is actually still sitting on the vast majority of its reserves. The prices of energy have gone up very, very small amount in China, and it still is the low-cost provider of electricity across the board. So it hasn't affected China in that way, but because China has done what they call a lot of demand destruction. And that means that they have shifted to alternates instead of using oil and gas. Now, there are certain areas, as I said before, 40% of all the oil and gas that is produced in the world does not go into any kind of engine. What it does is it goes into products, whether it's chemicals or perfumes, plastics, clothing. The long-form hydrogens are very useful especially in certain types of chemistry and certain types of products, and that will continue. So there's also moves to do away with that, finding substitutes for oil and gas in that area. But it's going to take time. Time is not what everyone has. And this is my main point here, is that the U.S. is trying all these things, but it doesn't have a lot of time. China is reacting faster than the U.S. has expected. The second weapon of choice is, of course, interfering with Chinese goods. Obviously, China imports a lot of raw materials, they add value to them, and then they sell those value-added products around the world. You've heard Eldridge Colby, who was referring to earlier, saying that the U.S. needs to control the choke points where that trade goes through. Obviously, why would you need to control choke points unless you intend to use them? And this idea is that you can prevent resources from coming into China, and you can prevent value-added goods from leaving China, and therefore that would hurt China, and that is true. And China is non-sedentary. They developed the Belt and Road Initiative, which includes land-based bridges that allow them to get to Europe, Africa, the Middle East, etc., to avoid these choke points. There's also the possibility of a northern corridor that would go basically through Russian-controlled waters through the northern end, which would allow them to get into the Atlantic. So China, there's this kind of cat and mouse, or checkers versus go, that is being played between the U.S. and China. Washington seeks to contain China. China seeks to maintain its ability to rise. The difference is the U.S. says that China is somehow evil because it is rising. And China says, look, we can all work together. That gets me to the first question that you asked. How does the U.S. get out of this? Because unless there's a path for the U.S., it could turn into a situation the Pentagon wins and they start throwing bombs around. And of course, it's not good for anybody, but desperation can lead to strange situations. My take on that is that the U.S. should work on its natural strengths. Its natural strengths are not its wages, which are very high and make it very prohibitively difficult to manufacture in the U.S. It certainly isn't regulations, despite many regulations being taken away, some, I think, ill-considered in terms of their protection of individuals, consumers, etc. It's still very difficult because you have local, state, and zoning laws and national standards and things like this. So that's more expensive. The U.S. does have resources, but because of the preceding things, items, high wages and regulation, it is also sometimes expensive to extract them. But what does the U.S. actually have? It has used to have the ability to attract great minds from all over the world. And they would come to the U.S. Seeking opportunity. This is the land of freedom. This is where they could, with hard work, rise to whatever level they were capable of. But that has changed. The anti-immigrant situation, together with suspicions of anybody foreign, especially anybody who's Asian-looking, do not have to be Chinese, because frankly, Americans cannot tell the difference, and I know that very well. I'm half Korean, but I've been called Chinese all my life. It's not a slur. It's just simply there's ignorance. We had people from Southeast Asia, Hmong. They don't look at all Chinese to me, but they were all described as Chinese. So there's a certain amount of going back to the Chinese exclusion law, this idea that anybody who looks a little Asiatic is somehow suspicious or uncivilized, etc. So racism is alive and well. This pushes out people who otherwise might be attracted to living in the United States, trying to pursue the American dream, and they have been leaving almost on a weekly basis. One or two people who've won Nobel Prizes or are esteemed in their field at prominent universities are leaving, and many of them are coming to China. Others are going to Europe. This does not help the U.S. The U.S. needs to turn that around. They need to stop pushing people out and start welcoming them in. With these assembled minds, what you do is you try to develop the science and then apply that science to goods and services that can be used across the world. If you are in the top echelon and you're creating solutions first, that is where you have the most opportunity to earn, because what you're offering is of unique value that adds productivity. And that's why people will buy these goods and services. It adds productivity. And as a result, they can pay more. So that means you're earning higher margins. Those higher margins can therefore pay the higher amounts needed to retain people who are very specialized. It's a little bit difficult for perhaps the rest of the United States who are not in demand, facing competition from artificial intelligence in some cases, especially white-collar workers in the law and accounting and those areas where you're gathering and collating and summarizing large amounts of information that can obviously be done by an AI much more quickly, efficiently, and probably more accurately. It doesn't give you accurate judgments, and there are dangers in that, but the fact is many of those people will lose jobs, and this is the first time in our history that you have had a concerted trend which is attacking the middle class, the white-collar worker. Before it was always blue-collar. Ironically, the blue-collar is doing well. If you study plumbing instead of sociology, you're in demand, you're able to get work, and there's a steady supply of money that is well above what a social worker would earn. It doesn't mean that we have to shift that way. My point is that societies change. They're dynamic, and the component pieces of it change. And this is one of the things that people and countries have to learn, that as countries change, as the dynamics of the markets change, you need to re-educate. You have places like Finland, which has a law that says every 9 years you're entitled to retrain yourself to get additional education. I think this is actually quite smart, because people are not, basically, you don't have any skills. What are you going to do? You want government assistance. And that is not a good road. People who are on government assistance for long periods of time, there are a lot of problems with drug use, all sorts of social issues and families and things like this. It is not good. People want to work. If they are, in fact, working, they have pride. They have the pride and they have suitable wages and a living. They're more invested in society than somebody who has none of that. So it's very, very important to the U.S. to acknowledge that it's on the front end of the economy and to continue developing that so it can pay higher wages, higher costs of bureaucracy, et cetera, because that stuff isn't going to go away despite Donald Trump saying it. It'll be back by the next generation of leaders will bring it back for various reasons. So at this point, the U.S. is kind of trapped in a bubble of its own making. It wants to maintain hegemony, but it wants to do it by going back to the old days. Well, you can never really swim in the same river twice. The river moves on. And in this particular case, the idea that Donald Trump had of reindustrializing America has so many problems and, quite frankly, hasn't worked. No one is rushing into that area because, quite frankly, there's no money to be made. If you add industrial capacity in the U.S., that means that you're going to be in competition with existing industrial capacity elsewhere. You're probably going to have to invest more money. You're going to have to pay more wages. You're going to have to higher costs of compliance. The logistics are not as good. How are you going to compete? Well, you're not. And that's the conundrum. It's a nice fantasy to say we'll go back to the old days, but the reality is you can't.